It was supposed to be a simple evening. January 2nd, 2000. Asheville, North Carolina. The kind of cold, quiet Sunday night that fades into memory. But for 18-year-old Zebb Quinn, it was anything but ordinary. That night, he clocked out of his shift at Walmart full of plans. He wanted to check out a used car he was excited about. Something sporty. Something to give him more freedom. He left work with a friend and coworker, Robert Jason Owens. They drove off in separate cars, allegedly heading toward the seller's place. But within just a few hours, Zebb vanished without a trace. He didn't come home. He didn't call. And no one saw him again. Owens told police that Zebb received a page, pulled over to use a payphone, then returned visibly shaken. Owens claimed Zebb said something urgent came up and he had to leave. That was it. Owens said they parted ways. That was the last known moment anyone reported seeing Zebb Quinn alive. But Owens' story quickly began to crack. Just hours after Zebb disappeared, Owens checked himself into a hospital, claiming he'd been in a car accident. But the police found no report, no evidence, and no damage to his vehicle. He had minor injuries, sure, but his story didn't add up. Then came the message. 2 days later, Zebb's Walmart supervisor got a text from Zebb's phone, saying he needed time off due to a family emergency, but Zebb's family knew nothing of an emergency. And more importantly, the message wasn't written in Zebb's style. Later, police would confirm the message was sent by Robert Owens. The case spiraled from there. 4 days after Zebb vanished, police found his Mazda parked outside a random barbecue restaurant. It had been staged deliberately. Inside the car were baffling objects. A puppy that didn't belong to Zebb, a hotel keycard with no confirmed match, a jacket that wasn't his, and a pair of oversized pink lips drawn across the back windshield in lipstick. It wasn't just a crime scene, it was a puzzle. One designed to confuse, to throw people off. One that looked more theatrical than accidental. To many, that lipstick symbol felt like a signature. Something left behind by someone proud of what they'd done. At the time, the police had no body. No evidence linking Owens directly to a crime. Just inconsistencies, missing time, and unanswered questions. But things would change 15 years later. Because Robert Owens would end up doing something horrific. Something that would make investigators wonder if Zebb's disappearance wasn't just a tragedy, but the first act in a much darker story. In 2015, a violent double murder brought Zebb Quinn's name back into the headlines, 15 years after he vanished. The man arrested was Robert Jason Owens, the last person known to have seen Zebb alive. Until then, Owens had lived quietly, avoiding suspicion. But that all changed when he was accused of killing Christy Schoen Codd, a former Food Network contestant, and her husband, JT. Christy was 5 months pregnant. Owens wasn't just arrested, he was exposed. Authorities found human remains burned in a wood stove on his property. He had sent fake texts from JT's phone to hide the murders. The brutality of the crime made national news. And suddenly Zebb's cold case was hot again. Investigators questioned Owens again about Zebb. This time, he cracked, partially. He claimed Zebb was dead, but said someone else was responsible. He claimed he was threatened, forced to help cover it up, and stayed silent out of fear. But he didn't name anyone. He gave no clear details, just enough to stir interest, not enough to act on. Owens' confession couldn't lead to charges. Still, police took another look at everything. Zebb's abandoned car, the lipstick mark on the window, the hotel keycard, the puppy inside. Owens claimed the whole scene had been staged. But he wouldn't say by who. Then came another twist. Owens had gone to the hospital the night Zebb vanished, claiming a car crash. There was no accident report, no witness, no car damage. It looked like a cover story. As investigators dug deeper into Zebb Quinn's disappearance, whispers of a secret relationship began to surface. It wasn't just speculation. It was a theory that would add a dark and personal twist to the case. According to police reports and interviews at the time, Zebb may have been romantically involved with a woman named Misty Taylor. But there was a problem. Misty already had a boyfriend. And that boyfriend? He was known to be violent, controlling, and deeply suspicious of outsiders. His name was Wesley Smith. Friends of Zebb later told investigators that he had mentioned a new relationship he was excited about, but he didn't give many details. He was careful with his words, almost like he was hiding something. Misty was close with Robert Owens as well, adding even more confusion to the dynamic. The idea that Zebb may have been caught in the middle of a dangerous love triangle quickly became a central focus. Police began to explore the possibility that Zebb was lured to his disappearance through emotional manipulation. Was the page he received at Walmart connected to Misty? Could Owens have been involved in setting a trap, driven by loyalty, jealousy, or fear of Wesley Smith? These were the questions investigators began to ask, but no one had answers. Misty denied any involvement, and Wesley wasn't charged with anything. Yet their names remained tied to the case for years. Adding fuel to the theory was the strange message sent from Zebb's phone 2 days later. It claimed he was dealing with a family emergency and needed time off. But there was no emergency. His family was confused. The message felt fake, cold and robotic. Investigators confirmed the message came from Owen's location, not Zebb's. Why pretend Zebb was still alive if something hadn't already gone terribly wrong? Despite growing suspicion around this trio, nothing stuck. There were no phone records, texts, or physical evidence tying Misty or Wesley to a crime. But the rumor mill didn't stop. Some believed Owens had been manipulated by someone else, someone who didn't want Zebb around. Others thought jealousy and rage may have fueled a confrontation that spiraled out of control. Whatever the truth is, one thing is certain. Zebb was caught in something far bigger than he realized. When Zebb Quinn's car was discovered 2 weeks after he vanished, the find raised more questions than answers. The light green Pindokusu Doksam Mazda protege was oddly parked at a barbecue restaurant not far from where Zebb had last been seen. To the average person, it looked like a regular car. Maybe someone forgot where they parked. But to investigators, the vehicle was a silent witness. And what was inside was anything but ordinary. On the rear windshield, someone had drawn a set of lips in bright lipstick intentionally and carefully. The kind of thing you'd expect from a lover, maybe a joke between friends, but in the context of a missing person case, it felt off. Inside the car was an even stranger collection. A hotel keycard to a room Zebb had never rented, a jacket that didn't belong to him, and a live puppy, scared, hungry, and completely out of place. Zebb loved animals, but no one could explain where the puppy came from. His family didn't recognize it, and his friends said he hadn't mentioned adopting a pet. It was just there, as if someone wanted it to be found. Many believe the dog was placed there to delay police involvement. After all, would someone abandon a car with a living animal inside if they were trying to quietly disappear? The hotel keycard also led nowhere. Police tracked it down to a local inn, but there was no record of Zebb checking in. No witnesses, no security footage. It was a dead end like so many other elements in this ganga. And then there was the jacket. It didn't match anything Zebb owned. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, nothing that gave investigators a solid lead. But its presence suggested someone else had been inside. That car after Zebb was last seen. Even more unsettling, the car had been left in the lot just a few days after Zebb disappeared. A co-worker of his on their lunch break spotted it and thought it looked familiar. It wasn't towed. It wasn't vandalized. It just sat there, like a forgotten clue waiting to be noticed. Was the car staged to send a message? Or was it just a clumsy attempt to make it look like Zebb had gone off the grid? Every item seemed planted. Every trace carefully selected to confuse, not to reveal. And the man tied to all of it, Robert Owens, refused to explain any of it. One of the most baffling pieces of Zebb Quinn's disappearance came from Robert Owens himself, the man who was last seen with Zebb, and the person who would later confess to involvement, without taking full responsibility. Just hours after Zebb vanished, Owens checked into a local emergency room with a strange story and unexplained injuries. He told doctors he had been in a car accident. His ribs were bruised and his head showed signs of trauma. But when police followed up on the claim, something didn't sit right. There was no police report, no witnesses, no tow truck call, and no damage to any vehicle. The hospital visit looked like a setup, an attempt to fabricate a believable reason for his injuries while distracting attention from what really happened that night. Investigators began to believe that Owens's trip to the hospital wasn't just bad timing. It was intentional, a way to create distance between himself and Zebb's disappearance. If people thought he'd been hurt in an accident, maybe no one would question what else he had done that night. But the lies didn't stop there. Owens initially told police he and Zebb had split ways after the failed car meeting. He claimed they were in separate cars. Zebb flashed his headlights and then sped away. That was it. Story over. But when they pressed for details, Owens began changing his story. First it was a flat tire. Then it was a wrong turn. Then it was the page Zebb had received at Walmart. Each time his version of events shifted slightly, subtle enough to cause confusion, but consistent enough to avoid immediate suspicion. That's what made it dangerous. Owens also claimed that he had tried to help Zebb, that Zebb was upset, paranoid, and possibly in some kind of trouble. But again, there was no proof, only Owens' words. And by the time police found Zebb's car 2 weeks later, all signs pointed back to Owens, even though none of them were conclusive. The hospital story, though, remains one of the most revealing parts of this case. It showed intention. It showed strategy. Owens knew enough to create a cover story before anyone even knew Zebb was missing. That level of calculation raised alarms, and even years later, investigators still point to that moment as the first major red flag. Why go to a hospital unless you're trying to be seen? Why invent a crash that never happened? Unless you're hiding something worse. As weeks turned into months and months stretched into years, the case of Zebb Quinn's disappearance grew colder. What once dominated local headlines slowly faded into the background, becoming one of those lingering mysteries people whispered about but stopped expecting answers to. And while the world moved on, Zebb's family never did. His mother, Denise Flahakis, remained his loudest advocate. She didn't believe for a second that her son simply ran away. Zebb had left behind his new car, his job, his bank account, everything he valued. He was responsible, careful, and had no history of mental health issues or risky behavior. To her, the case wasn't complicated. Someone did something, and the truth was being hidden. But despite the family's public pleas and constant pressure, the investigation stalled. With no body and no confirmed crime scene, police had very little to go on. The car offered no usable DNA. The hotel keycard went nowhere. The messages from Zebb's phone traced back to Owen's location. But that alone wasn't enough to prosecute. And Robert Owens? He clammed up. After admitting that Zebb was dead during the Codd murder investigation, he refused to elaborate. He offered no timeline, no motive, no explanation, just a vague confession that raised more questions than answers. What troubled many was the lack of urgency. Owens had now been involved in 2 murder investigations. One victim was a missing person. The other was a pregnant woman and her husband brutally killed. And yet, for Zebb's case, there were no new charges. No formal hearings, no arrests. Every year on the anniversary of Zebb's disappearance, his mother continued to speak out. She held on to the hope that someone, anyone, would come forward. Maybe Owens would finally talk. Maybe someone in the community had seen something but had been too afraid to speak. Maybe there was a forgotten detail waiting to be uncovered. But nothing ever came. What hurt the most wasn't just the loss, it was the silence. A silence that stretched across courtrooms, newsrooms, and neighborhoods. A silence that said this case is too cold, too tangled, too far gone. But Zebb's family never stopped believing that one day, the silence would break. Over the years, as the official investigation slowed, the internet took over. True crime forums, local rumor mills, and amateur sleuths began piecing together their own versions of what might have happened to Zebb Quinn. Some of the theories were wild, others oddly convincing, but almost all of them came back to one thing. Something much darker happened that night than anyone realized. One of the most persistent theories involves organized criminal activity. People speculated that Zebb might have gotten tangled up with someone dangerous, possibly over something small, money, jealousy, or even unknowingly witnessing something he shouldn't have. Some claimed that the page he received at Walmart came from someone luring him into a setup, and it wasn't just a change of plans, it was a trap. But if that's true, who sent it and why? Another theory focused on the location where Zebb's car was found. The restaurant where it sat untouched for days had connections to people who knew both Owens and Zebb. Some believed the parking spot was chosen on purpose, close enough to Zebb's world that someone would eventually find it, but far enough to delay discovery. The puppy inside? A twisted decoy, a distraction meant to stall the search. Or worse, a calling card. Then there's the idea that Owens didn't act alone. His vague confession hinted at another person, someone he was allegedly afraid of. Could that have been Wesley Smith, the boyfriend of Misty Taylor? Or someone else entirely? If Owens was manipulated or threatened, why protect that person now? Why not come clean after being sentenced to life in prison? Others believe Zebb's body was hidden somewhere in the vast forests and hills surrounding Asheville, remote, quiet, impossible to search completely. No major searches were ever conducted in the wilderness, largely because investigators had no starting point. No GPS, no cell phone pings, nothing, just silence. And of course, there are people who still hold on to the slimmest hope that Zebb is alive, that maybe he escaped something terrible, started over and left his old life behind. But that theory is thin. His bank accounts were untouched, his car, job, and loved ones abandoned. There's no evidence of a new identity, no sightings, just a gap 20 years long and counting. In any modern mystery, surveillance footage often holds the key. But in Zebb Quinn's case, cameras offered little more than glimpses, never answers. That night in January 2000, Zebb was captured briefly on gas station surveillance. Shortly after leaving Walmart, he appeared normal, just another young man making a call at a payphone. That call, however, would be his last confirmed contact. From that moment, Zebb Quinn simply vanished from every digital trail. There were no additional security videos, no highway cameras, and no ATM activity. For a case that unfolded in the early days of surveillance becoming widespread, the lack of footage left investigators working blind. One of the biggest Frustrations for police was that the areas Zebb likely traveled through weren't equipped with many cameras at the time. Even the parking lot where his Mazda Protégé was discovered 2 weeks later had no working surveillance. If it did, we might know who parked the car. We might see who placed the puppy inside. But instead, every opportunity to find a visual lead fell flat. Later, when detectives tried to piece together Owens's timeline, they discovered another dead zone. Despite Owens claiming to have been involved in a car crash, there were no traffic cams, no business cameras nearby, no visual proof. Even the hospital Owens visited had no footage showing who dropped him off, just the record of his injuries and his story. This absence of surveillance would prove to be one of the biggest hurdles in the investigation. Without video, the case relied entirely on testimony, most of it coming from one man with a motive to lie. Some believe this blackout wasn't accidental, that whoever orchestrated Zebb's disappearance knew exactly how to avoid being seen. They chose areas without cameras, acted quickly, and planted misleading evidence to muddy the trail. The hotel keycard, the lipstick mark, the jacket, the puppy, all placed with intent. Others think it was just bad luck, that in a time before smartphones and GPS trackers, it was still possible to vanish if the right combination of timing and location came together. But whether by design or coincidence, the result was the same. Zebb Quinn disappeared into a world without witnesses, without film and without footprints, a digital ghost in an age just before digital trails became impossible to erase. Even decades later, the name Zebb Wayne Quinn still haunts Asheville. For every investigator who's touched the case, for every news anchor who's told the story, and for every viewer just discovering it now, his face becomes hard to forget. His story isn't just a cold case. It's a puzzle made of lies, fear, and fragments that almost fit. Over the years, retired detectives, journalists, and online sleuths have tried to solve it. Podcasts have dissected every clue. YouTubers have mapped timelines. Reddit threads have connected dots that police never confirmed. But none of it has brought Zebb home. Robert Jason Owens remains at the center, serving life for a different horror, yet his half-confession about Zebb still lingers like smoke. He claimed he knew Zebb had died. He claimed someone else was behind it. But the lack of names, motives, or a body left investigators frozen in place. Owens never elaborated, and without hard proof, they couldn't act. The Quinn family hasn't stopped searching. Zebb's mother, who once described him as quiet, gentle, and loyal, spent years writing letters to lawmakers and police officials. She begged for the case to be reopened, re-examined, or just not forgotten, and slowly awareness grew. National news outlets picked it up again. A new generation of internet detectives took notice. But despite all this, there are still no arrests, no discovery, no closure. And maybe that's the most haunting part. Zebb Quinn's case still feels active, still alive, still waiting. New tips come in, new rumors circulate. Owens is still alive, still behind bars, and still holding answers. Somewhere out there may be a key piece of evidence that finally forces the truth into the light. Until then, this case sits in limbo, no longer cold but not yet solved. A space between suspicion and justice, between silence and confession, and in that space, a young man's story is kept alive, not just by those who knew him, but by strangers like you who refuse to look away. Outro, a name that demands justice. Zebb Quinn vanished over 2 decades ago, but his story isn't buried, it's just unfinished. Maybe the answer is buried in a forgotten field. Maybe it's locked inside a guilty man's mind. Or maybe it's waiting in plain sight, overlooked, ignored, dismissed. What's certain is this: someone knows what happened that night. And every person who watches, shares, or speaks Zebb's name brings us one step closer to the truth. If you found this story chilling, confusing, or deeply unfair, then good. That means it still matters. That means Zebb's voice still echoes, and until justice is served, that voice should never fade.